Welcome to another movie summary. Today we are going to the summary of the movie Good Will Hunting 1997. The story begins with a boy named Will. He is studying at home. Then his friend named Chucky comes after him. At that moment, at MIT, Professor Gerald says that whoever can solve this very difficult problem, I will publish his work in the university newspaper. Will, who is a janitor, is cleaning the school hallway. He sees a math problem on the board. After the students leave, he stares at the problem. After finishing his work, he goes to a cafe with his friend. But Will tells his friend that he is in a hurry and has to go home quickly. He goes home and works on the problem. The next day at school, he solves the problem on the board and writes the answer. After he finishes, they go play baseball. Then he tells Chucky to come to our cafe at Harvard University next week. A few minutes later, in a gathering, the students tell the professor that someone has solved the math problem. The professor is very surprised when he goes and sees the correct answer. But he can't find the person who solved the problem. Will goes to see a baseball game with Chucky and the rest of his friends. Suddenly, Will sees one of the sexiest people from his childhood in the stands. Later, he sees him again while driving. They get into a fight and the police come and arrest them. In the professor's classroom, he notices a large crowd of students. They all came to see who could solve the math problem. The teacher in the class says that the one who could solve the problem should introduce himself. But no one says anything. At that moment, Will is writing on the board. The teacher suddenly sees him. Will also gets scared and quickly leaves from there. Now the teacher comes and sees the board and realizes that Will is a genius. Now, as planned, Will and his friends go to the Harvard University cafe. One of his friends makes fun of Will because he was fired from janitor. Chucky goes up to two girls there and flirts with them. And he tells them that he is in your history class. At that moment, a student named Clark appears. He humiliates Chucky by showing off his knowledge of history. Now Will appears and explains all the historical questions and proves that he stole all his information from him and somehow humiliates Clark in front of the girls. One of the girls, Skylar, approaches Will and talks to him and even gives him her number, and says to him, "If you want, come out sometime." Will agrees to meet. Meanwhile, the professor goes to the building and ground's office to find Will. But he finds out that Will didn't show up for work that day, because Will got the job through his parole officer. So Gerald goes to court. There he finds Will on the charge of beating a police officer. The judge reviews his long history of misbehavior and his abusive childhood in foster care, and bail is set at $50,000. From prison, Will calls Skylar to ask how she is, and he tells him, "I'll come see you soon." Later, the professor meets him and tells him, "I'm here to help you. I'll bail you out, but there are two conditions. One, you have to work on your math, and the second condition is to go to therapy." Will agrees, but he doesn't take the therapy part too seriously. He studies with the math professor and enjoys it. But when it comes to therapy, Will has a problem. He makes fun of the therapist and doesn't talk. Later, the professor goes to a doctor named Sean. He was his former roommate in college and is a professional therapist. He tells him, "I want you to talk to Will." And he tells him, Will is a genius, but his morals are a bit special. My doctor agrees. Now Will visits him, but because he's so arrogant, he makes fun of a painting on the wall. The doctor doesn't care. Now Will is overreacting to make him angry, and insults his wife. Now the doctor gets really angry and tells him to say something like that next time, and tells him to see him again next week. That night, Will spends time with Skylar. Skylar talks about her high-level background and her plans to go to Stanford to study medicine. Then they get close and kiss each other. The next therapy session is by a lake. The doctor tells him about your opinions and about painting. I haven't slept yet. Then he says I'm from the park, and I don't know anything about real-life experiences in art and love or loss. And he says I lost my wife to cancer. And he tells her you're a person who doesn't have self-confidence. You're scared, and you're acting like a stubborn person by insulting others to make yourself look like a jerk. He tells him that life is not in books. It's lived by talking and sharing experiences. But Will is too scared to do this. He doesn't say much, but he starts thinking about it. He goes to call Skylar to express his interest, but he's scared and doesn't do it. In the third therapy session, Will gets up and leaves without even saying a word. My doctor doesn't pressure him and tells the professor that he can talk when he wants to. Will still copes very well with complex math problems, but he's talking very well in therapy sessions. He admits that I called Skylar but didn't express my interest. Sean tells him that you were very amateur. Will tells him, but I know what I'm doing. Sean tells him you should call him, but Will says no. I don't want to get close to Skylar. And he says if I get close, our relationship will be dull and boring. Sean tells him that's so ridiculous. You can't go through life without knowing anyone. So Sean talks about his wife's little habits. They laugh together again and he says these memories are unimportant. But they are very life-giving and he says we choose who comes into our lives or not. And then he reminds Will that you are not a perfect person. And Skylar is the same. He tells him to spend more time together and get to know each other better. Will tells him, "Have you ever thought about getting married again?" Sean says, "No, I'm loyal to my wife." But Will uses that against him. And he says, "Well, you can't know anyone without living together, so you expect me to know Skylar?" However, Will goes to Skylar. He apologizes and asks if we can meet again. Skylar tells him that I'm very busy with my schoolwork and I have to solve a difficult problem and hand it in. Will leaves and quickly returns with Skylar's homework and tells her that you have time to go out now, so let's go. They go to a dog show together. Skylar's dog also participates in that show and wins. Now Skylar realizes that Will grew up in the Boston area and asks her about her experiences and her siblings. Will says, "I have 12 older brothers." Of course, he's lying to him here. Skylar also wishes he could see them. In the next meeting, Will asks Sean if he regrets meeting his wife. Is that it? Sean tells him that everything has its pros and cons. Will says, "How do I know that Skylar is made for me?" Sean tells him a story here. He tells him that I met my wife at a baseball game. Then Sean talks about the important moments of that game. A crazy game that you had to wait in line the night before to buy tickets. Then Will gets excited and asks how the game went. Sean says, "I don't know and I didn't go to see the game because I was spending time with my wife." Suddenly Will angrily says, "Mister, why did you make fun of me? You missed such an important game for a woman?" Sean says, "Yes, but I never regretted my choice." Will slowly comes to his senses and they become close to Skylar and spend time together. Skylar asks him, "Where do you live? Who are your friends? And who are your brothers? Introduce them so I can get to know them." One day they meet up with his friend again and they tell each other funny stories. But Will still refuses to show Skylar his personal life. My friend Chucky tells Skylar that if he shows you his blood, he's afraid you'll leave him. Skylar says, "No, Dad, what's this? Why should I leave him?" Later, the professor meets with Sean to talk about Will. He says he has a lot of potential and Will should become a mathematician. But the doctor doesn't think Will is ready yet. In short, they argue and a disagreement arises between them. The doctor says that Will should figure out what he wants to do with his life. You shouldn't make him miserable. But the professor says no, he should become a cool mathematician. And he says that I sent Will's resume to a company. But on the other hand, Will sends Chucky to a job meeting instead of him and ruins his job interview. Skylar asks Will, "How strong is your visual memory?" Considering that your intelligence and visual memory are at the level of geniuses. Will explains that he is naturally good only in his own subjects and has no tricks at all. And he solves everything with a look. Now they become close again and kiss each other. Later, Skylar expresses her wish for Will to come to California with her. But Will is afraid and doesn't want to get close. So she yells at Skylar and tells him about her painful past. She tells him that I was in an orphanage when I was a child. I was abused and hurt. And she tells him that I don't have any siblings. And in order to push Skylar away, she lies to him and says that I hate you. And he breaks her heart, and he leaves. On the other hand, the assistant professor tells Will that he should thank Professor Gerald for his hard work on her. But Will doesn't take her words seriously because he doesn't care. When the professor comes and asks him how the meeting went, Will gets angry. And he tells him that I sent Chuck instead. And he says that I don't want to spend my whole life explaining things to people. My teacher tells him that you're being too nice, be a little grateful. Will gets angrier. And he tells him that I'll solve the problems that you're weak at. And to hurt the teacher even more, he fires his important problems. My teacher admits in despair that you have more potential than me and says that I just want to help you. Later, we see that Will goes to the intelligence agency office for a business meeting and makes fun of working for them by justifying their work. In the next therapy session, this issue becomes clearer. Will says, "Why should I be a genius? I can have a simple job with low income." They are also respectful, and he justifies his own work when he turns down the intelligence agency job. He says, "Maybe I want to be a plumber, or maybe I want to be a construction worker," and says these are important jobs too. Sean tells him to shut up, and he tells him that what you're saying doesn't make any sense at all. And he tells him that your stupidity has become unbearable. And he tells him to get out of here. Later, we see Will and Skylar having a bittersweet phone call. And at the end, they say goodbye to each other. Skylar tells him that she loves him, but he doesn't say anything. Will goes and sits alone on the couch. On the other side, Skylar boards a plane and goes to California to study. On the other side, we see Will and Chucky, who has gone to be a construction worker this time. Chucky gets angry and tells him, "What the hell are you? You're so smart and you're not a scientist. Do you want to be a construction worker for the rest of your life?" And he tells him, "I know you're emotionally hurt and you're doing this to defend yourself, but what you're doing is wrong." And he tells him, "If I see you working there in 20 years, I'll come and beat you up and kill you." Will comes to his senses and decides to go to Sean. But at that moment, Gerald and Sean are arguing. They're talking about their past mistakes when suddenly Will walks in. Gerald leaves. Sean also mentions Will's case to the judge that was evaluated. He tells him, "I know you were physically abused as a child." And he tells him, "My father beat me a lot too. But none of this is your fault. You can get better and you have to try." And Sean makes Will understand that none of this was his fault. And finally, Will no longer shows his pride and they hug each other and cry. Later, Will thinks about these behaviors alone on the bus. The doctor and Will meet for the last time. Will mentions his new job, which he got through the opportunity that Professor Jarl provided for him. Then, Shan gives him the number, and they hug each other. On his 21st birthday, his friends bought him an old car. And in between, they give him a gift. The professor also visits the doctor. They both apologize to each other and put aside their grudges. Then, we see Will driving to his house and leaving a note. From there, Chucky and his friends go to Will's house to pick him up in his car. But they see that Will is gone. Now Chucky is very happy about this because he realizes that Will has finally come out of his stupid comfort zone. On the other hand, Sean remembers reading Will and finds out that Will has gone to Skylar and quit his job. And Will begins his journey to California to start a new life with Skylar. But will he find her or not? Honestly, it doesn't matter at all whether he can find her or not. The only thing that mattered was that Will finally managed to get out of his safe circle. So friends, this is the synopsis of the movie Good Will Hunting 1997. If you like this synopsis, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel because you give me a lot of energy to continue.